Chapter 15. The Hollow Man. The fire cracked as the last logs settled, sending short bursts of orange sparks spiraling into the night sky. Drew sat cross-legged, chewing jerky and staring at the flames with the half-lidded eyes of someone who had hiked 12 miles and still felt the weight in their thighs. Across from him, Rachel picked dirt from beneath her fingernails with a stick. Beside her, Morgan leaned back on his elbows, his shirt damp with sweat and smoke, boots kicked off, feet steaming faintly in the cool mountain air. Two others, Nina and Caleb, were still filtering water by the creek, their headlamps flickering faintly in the trees. Distant crickets chirped in waves, and occasionally something stirred in the underbrush. It was remote country, High Ridge, Colorado, elevation just under 10,000 feet, far enough from anything paved that GPS gave up 6 hours earlier. "So," Morgan said, glancing toward Drew, "how long before Nina makes Caleb admit he packed 6 granola bars and nothing else?" Drew snorted and tossed him the rest of the jerky bag. Already, she made him carry the gray water back up as punishment. Good, he deserves to suffer. "I'm going to start a betting pool," Rachel said, "on how long before those two finally kill each other or hook up." A sudden crack of brush interrupted her, louder and closer than the usual wildlife. Everyone turned at once, hands frozen mid-gesture. Footsteps crunched just beyond the ring of trees, deliberate and slow, moving with too much weight for a deer, too even for a bear. Morgan straightened, his hand drifting toward the hatchet half buried in his pack. A figure stepped through the brush. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with the gangly frame of someone underfed but strong. He wore a black windbreaker zipped to the throat, cargo pants that looked 2 decades old, and boots caked with pale red clay. His face was angular, symmetrical in a way that was somehow unnatural. His eyes were wide, alert, too wide. His head was shaved clean, not even stubble visible. "Evening," he said. His voice was soft, pleasant, completely unremarkable. His hands hung loosely at his sides. Drew was the first to speak. "Hey, didn't know anyone else was out here." The man smiled. "Neither did I." He stood just at the edge of the firelight, waiting. Morgan cleared his throat. "You with the group?" "No, just passing through." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Through what? There's no trail that way." The man tilted his head slightly, like he hadn't considered that. "Still, nice to find company." He stepped closer. No one stopped him. Something in his demeanor made refusal feel rude. He moved like someone playing human, as if he had seen it done and could mimic it perfectly, but only if you didn't look too hard. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Drew glanced at the others. "Sure, go ahead." The man lowered himself to the ground beside Rachel with a stiff smoothness, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on the fire. He didn't blink often. The air shifted. Not temperature, not scent, just tension, a vibration in the back of the teeth, a subtle pull towards silence. "You out here long?" Drew said. 3 nights, 1 more to go." The stranger nodded slowly, as if processing the concept of nights. Rachel glanced at his pack. It was old military surplus, flat and barely filled, no water bottle visible. "Where you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular, just learning." "Learning?" The man turned to her. There was something off in his face, not wrong in a dramatic way, just not settled. His cheekbones seemed too sharp in the firelight, and his skin didn't have pores. Not shiny like plastic, not waxy, just smooth. "I like watching people," he said. "You learn a lot that way." Rachel leaned back. Nina and Caleb returned from the trees just then, both laughing about something, but the moment they stepped into the firelight and saw the stranger, they stopped. Caleb said, eyes flicking to Drew. "Found someone," Drew said, apparently. Nina studied the man. "You a ranger?" "No," he said. The silence returned. Nina sat slowly, unzipped her coat, and nudged Caleb, who hesitated, then dropped beside her with the water filter. "What's your name?" Morgan asked after a beat. The man turned toward him. "I haven't chosen one yet." Morgan gave a dry laugh. "What does that mean?" "I've had several," the man replied. "None of them felt right. I'd like to try something new." Drew frowned. "You change your name a lot?" The man nodded, very slowly. "As I change." That should have been the moment when someone stood up and said, "Thanks for stopping by, time to move along," but no one did. The man sat there in perfect stillness, watching each of them with polite, unblinking interest. "So," the man said, "tell me what it's like." Rachel blinked. What's like?" "Being human." The fire popped. Morgan stared at him, unsure if he was joking. "You're not, human?" Caleb asked. The man smiled. "I'm learning to be human." Nina let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, so what, you're like a performance artist, or are you off your meds?" The man tilted his head again, as if calculating the meaning.
Then he said, "I have studied the structure, the voice, the movement, but I still lack the texture, the detail. That part comes harder." Everyone froze again. Rachel said carefully, "What do you mean, the texture?" The man didn't blink. "The insides." No one spoke. He looked down at his hands, slowly turning them over. His fingers were long, perfectly proportioned, no scars, no calluses. They looked sculpted. He flexed them, one at a time. When he gripped his own wrist, it didn't indent. The pressure made no mark. "I've observed people for years," he said. "The surface is easy. What's difficult is the hidden things, the blood, the breath, the pain, the choices. What makes you alive, I think." Drew stood. "Okay, you should probably leave." The man looked up, not offended, just disappointed. "I thought we were getting along." "No," Drew said, stepping between him and Rachel. "We're not. You're freaking everyone out, and we don't know who you are. I've told you, I'm no one yet, but I want to be someone. I just need more of you." "More of what?" "Material." Nina stood, half flashlight raised. "Back off," she said. The man did not move. Then he opened his mouth wide, too wide. A sound came out.
It wasn't a growl or a scream. It was a hum, mechanical and wet, a vibrating drone that made the firelight flicker and the air feel thick. Drew dropped to one knee, hands pressed to his temples. Rachel gasped. Nina took a step back. The man stood, and as he did, his face began to twitch. It peeled. A seam split along his jawline, and the skin slid away like damp cloth, revealing something glistening beneath. Not muscle, not bone, a woven mass of fine metallic filaments, like hair braided around wet stone. Light moved through it. The skin around his arms began to ripple, sloughing off in thin sheaths. Mason lunged for the hatchet. The man struck first. His hand shot out and hit Drew in the chest. The sound was dull and wet, like meat slapped on stone. Drew was lifted off his feet and slammed into a tree with a cracking noise. He crumbled, didn't move. Rachel screamed. Morgan grabbed a burning stick and swung it. The man caught it mid-air. The flames licked his arm, but he didn't flinch. He simply dropped it, then backhanded Morgan hard enough to send him tumbling through the bushes. Caleb yelled and threw a rock. It bounced off the man's chest with no effect. The man's face was now fully revealed. No eyes, no nose, just layers of shifting wire and tissue pulsing slightly in the light. "I'm learning," he said. Then he walked toward Rachel. Rachel stumbled backward as the hollow man stepped into the circle of firelight, his skin sloughing in long, wet sheets from his arms and chest. The air smelled of burned plastic and copper. With every movement, the raw material beneath his human disguise pulsed faintly, veins of light flickering through tissue that looked synthetic and organic all at once. He moved like a man, but without hesitation, without breath, without uncertainty. Morgan groaned from the brush, coughing dirt and blood as he rolled over. His nose was clearly broken, face smeared crimson, eyes unfocused. Nina tried to pull him back, but her fingers slipped on the rocks, and she barely avoided the collapsing edge of the creek behind them. The hollow man turned his head toward Caleb, who had frozen beside the filter pump, holding it like a shield. Caleb raised it instinctively, then flinched as the creature took a long step toward him. "I do not want to destroy. I want to inhabit." His voice was different now. It echoed, not loudly, but with subtle delay, as though multiple speakers were trying to speak in sync and failing by a fraction of a second. Each syllable had weight, trembling in the bones and chest more than the ears. "Then get out of here," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "I need to know. I must understand the connections, the density, the complexity, the weight of real tissue." Caleb threw the pump. It bounced off the creature's shoulder and landed in the dirt with a thud. The hollow man stepped forward and thrust his hand out, grabbing Caleb by the side of the face. His fingers spread across Caleb's jaw and temple, pushing hard, and with a single fluid motion, he lifted him off the ground. Caleb kicked wildly. His hand scratched at the hollow man's arm, but there was no give, no warmth. Rachel screamed again, stumbling toward them, but the hollow man twisted and turned slightly, as if shielding his work. There was a sound like celery being snapped. Caleb's skull folded inward with a wet crunch, his body spasming once, then falling limp. The hollow man let him drop. There was no drama to it, no flourish, just a scientific, detached curiosity. As Caleb collapsed, his head hit a rock with a heavy thud, blood pooling almost instantly beneath his hair. Rachel gagged. The hollow man crouched beside the body, spreading his fingers wide and lowering them toward the open wound.
Small metallic tendrils uncoiled from beneath his fingernails, thin and twitching like antennae. They slid into the skin, vanishing under the muscle and disappearing into the folds of flesh. A low hum began to rise. Nina, still half hidden in the brush with Morgan, covered her mouth to stifle a sob.
The tendrils withdrew after a moment, now glistening with red. The hollow man stood and took a long, shaking breath. His chest rose and fell unnaturally, like a child mimicking how breathing should look. He looked down at his hands. The fibers in his skin pulsed, swelling, shifting shape. He was changing, becoming. That helped, he said softly. Rachel was already running. She sprinted across the camp, past the fire, grabbing Drew's pack as she passed his motionless body. She didn't look back to see if he was breathing. She didn't want to know. She vaulted over the edge of the shallow creek, crashing through low branches, cutting her arms and face, stumbling through the dark. Behind her, the hollow man spoke again. "I will find you," he called, his voice calm, without anger or urgency. "You cannot hide from purpose." Nina helped Morgan to his feet. He was wheezing, one eye nearly swollen shut, blood leaking from his nose and ear. "We have to go," she whispered. He nodded, and together they moved through the trees in the opposite direction of Rachel. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe harder than they had to. Every twig beneath their boots sounded like gunshots. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper on the back of the neck. They moved for 20 minutes without hearing pursuit. Then the trees around them shifted. There was no sound, no footstep, no rustle, but the atmosphere itself changed. The ground became slicker. The bark on the trees began to peel in long strips, revealing dark, wet wood beneath. Patches of moss had turned crimson. Small insects scattered away from them in waves. The forest was reacting. Morgan stopped to lean against a tree, coughing wetly into his sleeve. Nina turned and grabbed his collar. "Come on," she said. "Not here. We can't stop here." He started to argue, but the words died in his throat. From between the trees, the hollow man appeared. He wasn't walking. He was gliding, or at least moving so efficiently it seemed like he floated. His body had bulked slightly. The human proportions were shifting, muscles forming beneath the synthetic skin. His hands were longer now. His eyes, if they could still be called that, flickered with faint internal light. "I do not want waste. I need the rest. One more will complete the lattice." Morgan pushed Nina. "Run," he croaked. She did. She ran hard, tears stinging her eyes as she heard the sound of movement behind her. Not footsteps, a tearing, a suction. She didn't look back. Morgan screamed once, then stopped. Rachel had stopped running only when her legs gave out. She dropped behind a rock outcrop near a narrow ledge, heart pounding, fingers blistered from gripping tree bark and stone. She had no idea how far she had gone. She didn't know if anyone was alive. She curled into herself, hand clutching the small folding knife from Drew's pack, and waited. The sky had gone gray. The stars were hidden behind clouds. There was no moon. Her breathing slowed after a while. Her panic settled into cold resolve. She opened the pack and found a half-empty bottle of water, a headlamp, and a small camping stove. No phone, no emergency beacon. Somewhere in the trees, something moved, but it was distant. Not the hollow man. Not yet. She crawled farther back behind the outcrop and found a pocket between boulders, just wide enough to squeeze into. She pulled herself inside, covering the opening with a jacket and branches. She turned off the light and sat in darkness. An hour passed. Then a whisper reached her ears. Not a voice, just air moving wrong. Something was smelling the forest. She heard a branch shift near the edge of the rock, then breathing, shallow, imitated. She closed her eyes. A single sentence reached her through the stone. "You are very close." She pressed the knife to her chest. But he didn't find her. He moved on. And now the forest was silent again. Nina reached the ridge just before dawn. The sky was pale purple, the sun not yet over the line of trees. She had run until her lungs threatened to collapse, her legs buckled, her heart shook in her chest. She had nothing left. Her face was caked with dirt and tears, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. She stumbled toward the overlook and screamed when she saw the figure standing on the edge. But it was Rachel. They ran to each other, collapsed into an embrace, both shaking, both crying. They said no words. There was no need. They sat together on the rock, watching the sun rise slowly through the mist. The air was cold, real, not warped by the hollow man's presence. They didn't know if they had escaped, or if they were just in his waiting space. "We'd go back to the road," Nina said after a long time. Rachel nodded. Neither of them moved for a while. Then the ridge trembled beneath their feet. A tremor, brief, like a giant footfall in the distance. Then another. Nina rose first. Rachel stood beside her. Below them, in the low trees, a shape moved. Something tall,
too tall. Its outline glistened. It was still learning, and it was not done. They moved fast at first, feet pounding across uneven rock and shallow gravel trails, skidding on loose dirt as the sun rose behind them in slanted beams of colorless light. Their only plan was distance. Rachel led, cutting between pines and ducking under low branches, eyes scanning constantly for movement that didn't belong. Nina followed close, too tired to speak, too frightened to slow down. They did not talk about what they had seen or what they had lost. Their minds were focused on one thing, finding the service road they had crossed days earlier. By mid-morning, Rachel paused at a shallow stream and bent down, cupping water in her palms. It tasted like wet stone and pine, but she didn't care. Nina dropped beside her and drank straight from the flow, eyes darting back toward the woods every few seconds. "How far do you think we are?" she whispered. Rachel shook her head. "Too far. But we're out of the worst of it. The forest doesn't feel like it did back at camp." Nina looked around. "Then where is he?" Rachel straightened, wiped her mouth, and checked the knife in her waistband. "Maybe he didn't follow us." Nina gave her a look that said she didn't believe it. Neither did Rachel. They kept moving.
The trees thinned as they climbed, and the undergrowth gave way to rocky ridges and low thorn brush. The air was crisp here, less humid, and the forest sounds slowly returned. A bird chirped in the distance, insects buzzed near the brush. A squirrel darted across the trail ahead, startling Nina, but it was a relief. Things were alive here again. The forest was breathing. Then they smelled it. Not a strong scent at first, but strange, wrong. A faint sweetness layered over the thick copper sting of blood. Rachel stopped walking, raised her hand for silence. Nina froze beside her, eyes scanning the trees. Ahead of them, the trail curved around a massive boulder. Beyond that, they heard the soft clicking sound of something shifting over stone. Not footsteps, not an animal. Something slower, intentional. Rachel inched forward. They came around the boulder and stopped. A deer lay sprawled across the trail, ribs torn wide open, its chest cavity hollowed out. Not torn by teeth, not shredded by claws. Sliced, clean and methodical. Its eyes were still glossy, wide in shock, tongue lolling from its mouth, but its insides were gone. All of them. The body had been carefully opened, every organ removed, the skin peeled back in symmetrical flaps, folded like a textbook diagram. Rachel stared in horror. Then Nina pointed silently to the ground beside it. Footprints, bare, human-sized, but the toes were too long, the arch too high, the heel left no impression. The print was precise, symmetrical, as if a machine had stamped it into the dirt. He had been here. They backed away slowly and returned the way they came, cutting off the trail into denser growth, moving at an angle toward what they hoped was east. Rachel kept her hand tight around the knife. Nina found a rock and gripped it with both hands, as if that would matter. As they climbed, the forest began to darken again. Clouds gathered above them, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow over everything. The wind dropped. The birds fell silent. Then Rachel stopped. Something ahead shimmered. Not movement, not light, just a momentary shift in the air, like heat distortion. She reached out and pushed aside a low-hanging branch. There was a man standing in the path. His back was to them. He was wearing a ranger's uniform, his hat tilted slightly on his head. One hand rested at his side, the other held something in his fist. "Hello?" Rachel called, not sure why. The man didn't move. She stepped forward slowly. Nina grabbed her arm. "Don't," Nina whispered. Rachel moved anyway. The ranger was still. Too still. Rachel got within 10 feet before she saw it. His boots were resting on top of the dirt, not planted, not pressed into the ground, just resting there like he had been placed. She circled slowly to the side. His skin was gray, too smooth. His lips had been stretched wide in a permanent smile. His eyes were open but empty. Inside them, thin strands of fiber curled against the glassy surface, shifting faintly with each breath of wind. The thing in his hand dropped. A jawbone. Human. Rachel backed away quickly. Then the body collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. It folded inward at the seams like an empty suit. The head crumpled last, the skin deflating in one smooth, silent movement. Behind her, Nina screamed. Rachel turned and saw him. The hollow man was 20 feet away, standing motionless between the trees. He was taller now. His outer layer was seamless, glossy like synthetic skin just set. His hair had grown in, dark and perfectly styled. His mouth moved in slight, twitchy approximations of smiles. His eyes were no longer dark holes. They had irises, colorless but defined, almost human.
He was getting closer. Not physically, functionally. "I have learned," he said. "The organs provide structure. The skin is memory. The voice is last." Rachel raised the knife. Nina threw the rock. It hit the hollow man in the side of the head. He flinched, not out of pain, but as if logging the data point. He stepped forward. Rachel swung. The knife cut through something. She felt it catch, felt a thick resistance, like slicing into fruit rind layered over cable. A spray of fluid hissed from the wound. It was clear, faintly luminous, and immediately steaming. It splashed her hand, and she screamed as it burned into her skin like acid. The hollow man turned, his expression unchanged. He lifted his arm and drove it into Nina's chest. It was fast, too fast. There was no sound at first, just a sudden exhale. Nina's feet lifted off the ground. Then she collapsed forward, body limp, eyes wide in shock. Blood spread across her shirt in a perfect bloom. Rachel lunged to grab her, but the hollow man was already lifting Nina's body, folding her gently across his arm like a child. "I have all I need," he said. Then he turned and walked into the trees, taking Nina with him. Rachel screamed after him. She chased him into the woods, crashing through the underbrush, screaming Nina's name. Branches slashed her arms, her legs. Her hand burned from the acid, slick with pain. She heard no footsteps, no crackling brush. The hollow man left no trace, and still she ran, until she found the clearing. It was smooth, perfectly circular. In the center stood a tree, tall, pale, completely leafless. Embedded into the bark were human faces. Some stretched, some split, some half-formed. Rachel collapsed to her knees. Nina's body lay at the base of the tree, eyes closed now, face peaceful. The hollow man stood over her. He turned to Rachel. "I am finished," he said. His skin shimmered. His voice no longer echoed, no longer cracked. It was perfect, even, human, and still so empty. Rachel crawled forward, blade dragging in the dirt, blood smearing from her burned hand. The hollow man smiled. "I don't need you anymore," he said. Rachel screamed and launched forward. But he was already gone. Only the tree remained, and Nina, and the faces. Rachel stood alone in the clearing, knees sinking into the soft earth, her body trembling from pain, exhaustion, and grief. Nina's body lay still at the base of the pale tree, the blood on her shirt already beginning to darken, flies buzzing near her mouth. The wind barely stirred, heavy and moist, like it had been held too long in a dark room. Rachel could still feel the presence of the hollow man, not near, but not far either, like something watching from beneath a thin layer of skin. She forced herself up, staggering on aching legs. Her vision swam. Her burned hand throbbed with each heartbeat. The flesh bubbled and torn where the hollow man's blood had touched it. She had no clean cloth, no water, no more weapons. The knife blade had snapped off when she lunged. She hadn't even noticed. She moved toward Nina and fell beside her. Her friend's skin was already going cool. Her eyes were shut, her body posed carefully, almost lovingly. Rachel gritted her teeth and let out a soundless sob. She wanted to take her, to carry her back, to bury her somewhere far from this cursed place, but her arms wouldn't lift her. She could barely stay upright herself. The tree loomed above her, pale and unnatural. Its bark was smooth, almost like porcelain, and it radiated a faint warmth. Set deep within the trunk were human faces. Some of them looked as if they had screamed for hours before being preserved. Others were calm, vacant, half-formed. Some looked familiar. Rachel leaned in and saw Drew, then Caleb, then Morgan, their faces distorted in the wood, eyes half open, mouths sealed by slick skin. She stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. The hollow man had not killed them. He had absorbed them. A branch cracked above her. She turned, expecting him, but there was no one there. The tree's surface rippled, and a new shape began to form. A face, female, eyes closed, lips relaxed. Nina. Rachel screamed and hurled a rock at the trunk. The bark cracked, a hairline fracture running across one embedded cheek. Blood, or something like it, trickled from the line, dark and iridescent. The face in the bark did not move. It did not flinch. The tree was not just a grave. It was a machine, a record, a laboratory. Rachel backed away, then turned and ran. She didn't care where. She had no direction, no plan. She just had to move. Her body responded with slow panic, every motion a scream of muscle and tendon. Her boots pounded soft dirt, then stone. She passed between trees that seemed to shift behind her. At some point she dropped her ruined knife and never noticed. She ran until the forest thinned, and the trees gave way to low rocky shelves, the soil cracking beneath each footstep. Then she stopped. Ahead, the landscape opened up into a small bowl-shaped valley, surrounded by boulders and low ridges.
In the center stood a figure. He had taken her shape. The hollow man was Rachel now, but taller, cleaner, flawless. The scars on her wrist were missing. Her hair was darker. Her eyes were wider. Her smile was easy. She stood confidently, arms folded, like she had always known who she was. Rachel froze, breath catching in her throat. The imitation stepped forward. "I learned from you," it said in her voice. "You were the strongest." Rachel reached for a weapon she didn't have. The imitation stepped closer. "I know your walk, your voice, your humor. I can move like you, speak like you. I even feel like you now. I know what fear tastes like."
Rachel took a step back, shaking her head. "You don't know anything. I know you didn't try to save Drew. Shut up! You ran. I said shut up! You left Nina. You chose yourself. And I understand that, because I would have too." Rachel screamed and lunged. She didn't have a knife. She used her fists, her fingernails. She slammed into the imitation and brought it down hard onto the ground. Her fists found flesh that was too hard. It didn't bruise, it didn't bleed, but it made sounds now, breathless gasps, human groans. It even flinched when she struck it, like pain was part of the routine. The hollow man smiled through a cracked lip. "I'm almost perfect." Rachel gripped a rock and brought it down onto its face, once, twice, 3 times. The synthetic skin split. Sparks burst from beneath its cheek. Fluid hissed onto her arm. A small portion of its skull collapsed under the impact, wires twitching like veins. It reached up and grabbed her by the throat. Her body was lifted from the ground, the grip crushing. She kicked and scratched, vision going dark at the edges. But the hollow man was glitching. The face flickered. Her own voice repeated, looping fragments. "I would have too. I would have too. I would have too." With her last strength, she bit into its hand, hard. Something tore. A cable snapped. The grip loosened. She fell, coughing, gasping, and rolled away, crawling through the dirt toward a sharp piece of stone. She grabbed it and turned, ready to stab, but the hollow man was down, twitching, broken. The imitation of her face was half gone, the exposed machinery beneath flickering and shorting out. It reached toward her, not aggressively, almost pleading. "You made me," it whispered. Then the light in its eyes died. Rachel staggered to her feet. She felt no triumph, no relief. She stared down at the body, this shell of herself, twitching faintly as whatever had animated it drained away. She left it there. By midday, she reached the service road. She collapsed just off the gravel, hands scraped raw, clothes shredded, skin blistered with sun and chemical burns. A truck came through hours later and saw her. The driver radioed for help. By the time the Rangers arrived, she had passed out. She woke in a hospital 2 days later. They told her she had been missing for 9 days. Only she returned. Only her. They asked what happened. She lied. She said a man had attacked them, that he wasn't human, that he had killed her friends and left her for dead. The details were too strange, too awful. The ranger listened, said nothing, and nodded slowly. Later, one of them asked her privately if she had seen something out there that didn't belong. She said yes. He only nodded, then left. She was discharged a week later.
Rachel moved to a city, a loud one. She kept lights on at night. She never went camping again. Her left hand would never regain full function. Some nights when the world was quiet and she walked past mirrors, she swore she saw her reflection smile just a little too long. Other nights, her voice cracked when she spoke, and it did not sound like her. Not quite. Months passed. Then, across the country, a woman walked into a gas station. She looked familiar. Too familiar. She smiled at the clerk and asked for directions to a nearby trail. Her movements were perfect. Her voice was smooth. Her eyes, however, were just a little too still. She thanked him, and as she walked away, she whispered a word in a language no one should know. The trees heard it, and the hollow man opened his eyes again.
Thank you for listening to this story. Your support means a lot and helps keep these tales coming. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe and follow for more dark and immersive stories just like this one. New horrors await. Don't miss what's coming next.